With over 150 champions now present in League of Legends at the time of this video's release, that means there's 150 passives, 150 Qs, 150 Ws, 150 Es, and 150 ultimates in the game. And if you take these abilities, mix and match them around, there's literally trillions of different combinations and permutations that you can make. And so I thought it would be a fun idea to make a video detailing the best abilities for each role in the game, the best passive, Q, W, E, and ultimate. So let's take it from the top by starting with top lane. Because this is the first video, I think it's important to lay out some ground rules. I understand that my choices will not be universally agreed on, and with a game as complex and multidimensional as League of Legends, obviously there will be situations where one ability is just vastly superior to another. Therefore, some degree of subjectivity will be present, but hopefully the ones I choose will be generally concurred with. I think it's also important to explain my decision process just so that you can get an idea for why I chose the abilities that I did. First and most importantly, the evaluation of each ability is based on their usability and effectiveness when placed in a vacuum. Obviously, a lot of champions are designed and played around a certain playstyle or element, especially in the top lane, such as Illaoi's Tentacles, Darius' Bleed, Renekton's Fury, Rumble's Heat, so on and so forth. But since the three basic abilities, one ultimate and one passive, will essentially be combined together into a theory-crafted champion, those abilities would have to be able to function perfectly with or without external factors falling into play. For example, some ultimates that you steal when playing Sylas can be noticeably less effective since they lack the supplemental components that make those ultimates really strong. Illaoi's Leap of Faith is an extremely threatening force because of her ability to single-handedly win teamfights with it. However, since Sylas will have no way to control those tentacles, it's basically a dead ability for him aside from the brief damage. Other examples would be Kennen's ultimate, which will do quite a bit of damage, but it won't stun because Kennen's stun is tied to his passive. Things like that. Another note to cover is that I'll be choosing the best ability based on its overall usage. Certain skills may have applications only in specific situations and be the best at them, such as Shen's ultimate being almost unparalleled in utility, but it grants no benefit to him in the laning phase or in 1v1s. In other words, whichever abilities I choose will be graded based on how versatile they can be and not how well they do their job. Lastly, the pool of champions for each role that I'll be sifting through are those of their main role. Someone like Akali can go top and mid lane, but she's mostly played mid, and so therefore I will only base her in the mid lane. Lux can be played as a mid and support, but you usually see her in support, which is where I'll be evaluating her. So with that out of the way, I think it's time to get into it. Just to remind you, this list is subjective but is still grounded in empirical data and concepts. At the end of this video, let me know your own list of the best abilities for top lane. I'd love to see what everyone's versions are. Passives are the bare essence of just about every champion in the game, and it's the defining trait that usually influences the rest of one's kit. As a result, it makes selecting the best one arguably the most difficult, given that a lot of champions have very good passives, but only on that specific champion with those specific abilities. Conveniently though, top lane is probably the easiest role aside from maybe AD carry to narrow down a lot on the list, given that many of the passives are quite simple, with a few of them basically only being a single sentence. The best one for top lane is arguably Shen's Key Barrier. While not the most conspicuously imposing passive, being able to consistently provide any champion with a decent sized shield by successfully casting an ability can mitigate several thousands of damage over the course of a game. It has a modest cooldown at 10 seconds, but it refreshes with every ability cast, and the shield value scales off of bonus health, which a lot of top laners build because of the prevalence of tanks and bruisers. Additionally, the refresh amount increases based on level, to the point where you can basically have the shield up forever once you reach the mid to late game. Even though it's still very powerful on the original owner, part of what balances Key Barrier is that Shen has relatively high cooldowns and energy costs on all of his abilities. On top of that, only 2 of them can trigger the refresh, acting as a natural inhibitor to prevent him from having way too many shields. If you gave this passive to just about anyone else, it would make them much more resilient in the laning phase because Key Barrier would essentially be bone plating with a much lower cooldown. And since it has the properties of being a shield, it can also synergize with certain components like Revitalize or Shield Bash. Honorable mentions go to Mordekaiser's Darkness Rise, Darius' Hemorrhage, and Maokai's Sap Magic. Darkness Rise provides a very large damaging aura that can whittle down enemy champions much faster than you would expect, and only requiring 3 attacks or abilities to land makes for an easy condition to be met. The downside is that its maximum impact is only demonstrated if you build items with ability power, and top lane has more champions that build tank or attack damage instead. Not only that, but it excels mostly in long extended battles, which is a very common thing to happen in top lane, but in teamfights some of them can be very quick. Hemorrhage is notorious for being able to inflict damage over time that rivals or even surpasses that of Ignite. And at maximum stacks, it provides a ludicrous amount of bonus AD from 30 up to 200 freaking 30 at max level, a stat boost that can be game breaking on a lot of champions. Obviously, this passive is balanced on the basis that Darius attacks really slowly, so he faces relative difficulty applying the 5 stacks quickly enough, and while this isn't as trivial of a problem on other champions, Shen's passive narrowly beats out Darius's because the former is much more accessible since it has a much easier activation requirement. Lastly, I chose Sap Magic for similar reasons to Key Barrier. Being able to heal for that much health can fix a lot of sustainability issues that many champions face, but again, Key Barrier is just slightly easier to activate and doesn't face problems with grievous wounds the way healing does. Q generally serves as a champion's workhorse ability, often being their main damaging tool, having relatively low cooldowns and resource costs compared to their W and E. Basically, Q has one job: to do damage, and as much of it as possible, as consistently as possible. The one that does this best by leaps and bounds would have to go to Riven's Broken Wings. Very few damaging abilities are paired with a dash, let alone 3. Broken Wings slashes in front of you 3 separate times, with the last one being an AoE knockback that also lets you jump over walls. The damage is quite high if you land every single strike on a target. It has a total attack damage ratio just under 200%, and while it has a decently high cooldown at 13 seconds, it's essentially 3 abilities packed into one, with each Q resetting your basic attack timer. And if this new conceptual champion in question we're making has Riven's Q along with Shen's passive, you can get 2 shields in one rotation of Broken Wings, which is a pretty deadly combination. Heck, this ability may just even be in the top 5 best Qs in the entire game with how many different functions it has. Broken Wings can get you 5 hemorrhage stacks very quickly, it can instantly activate Darkness Rise, and it can reduce Sap Magic's cooldown by 12 seconds with each rotation. Some other champions in top lane can probably make better use of Broken Wings than even Riven herself. Honorable mentions go to Camille's Precision Protocol, Nasus' Siphoning Strike, and Rumble's Flame Spitter. Precision Protocol is debatably the strongest of the auto-attack empowering abilities. It has a very low mana cost of 25, making it spammable, a reasonably low cooldown, it gives you bonus movement speed, and can be used twice, with the second one dealing true damage. This attack is specifically what makes Camille such a powerful scaler, and would be a very desirable asset to have on any top laner, especially duelists. Siphoning Strike does not come with all the fancy bells and whistles of Precision Protocol, but it comes with the benefit of infinitely scaling. The only thing that holds this attack back from being overpowered is that Nasus is one of the weakest champions in the early game and one of the most kiteable in the mid to late game. Allowing a more mobile champion to have access to this Q can make it vastly more terrifying. Finally, Flame Spitter has some of the highest base damage and AP ratios in the entire game, on top of covering a large area. You'll never get the 50% bonus damage on it because you don't have Rumble's heat mechanic, but it also means that you can spam it as much as you want without worrying about overheating yourself, which is a pretty consistent trade-off. But again, AP is in the minority in the top lane, which takes a few points off, still a spectacular damaging ability regardless. W's tend to be the utility ability on most champions. They would consist of anything between shields, to buffs, to crowd control, and for most champions it's usually the one that you would max last, since the important thing was to just have the ability, not necessarily have it be really strong. It was pretty tough to choose for top lane given that the vast majority of W's are only at their best in conjunction with the rest of that champion's kit, such as Rengar's Battle Roar Cleanse or Renekton's Point and Click Stun being locked behind their passives, but ultimately I decided on Fiora's Riposte. Being able to effectively grant yourself 3/4 of a second of invulnerability is not a tool to be taken lightly. When used at the right time, it literally completely stops any hostile interaction that comes your way with the exception of towers, damage, crowd control, debuffs, riposte and parry, even things like Ignite and Exhaust. It does come with a long cooldown and doesn't do that much damage for champions that don't build ability power, but it allows you to slow both movement speed and attack speed by 50% for 2 seconds, enough to neutralize a lot of champions in the top lane since many rely on weaving and basic attacks. If it blocks any form of crowd control, the cripple instead becomes a stun for 2 seconds. Fiora is legendary for being one of the strongest 1v1 duelists in the game, and Riposte plays a major part in that. Honorable mentions go to Sylas's Kingslayer, Pantheon's Shield Vault, and Set's Haymaker. Kingslayer does commendable damage and heals for an insane amount while having a modest cooldown of 7 seconds at max rank. This ability is what makes Sylas such a nuisance to deal with if you don't have the burst to erase him out of the fight right away. If your opponent does not have the DPS high enough to kill you before this ability comes off cooldown, you could be healing massive amounts even without ability power. Shield Vault offers little damage but is a dash paired with a 1-second stun and has a surprisingly low cooldown. You're not getting any bonus effects since Mortal Will is tied to Pantheon's passive, but a point-and-click dash that stuns targets is very powerful and effective. However, what makes this ability worse than Riposte is that it's mostly only good to use in offense, whereas Riposte can be used for both offense and defense. Of all the W shields in top lane, I would say Haymaker is the best one. I was considering Silent Soul Furnace as one of the honorable mentions given the infinite health scaling, but Haymaker packs a much bigger punch, no pun intended. And a full shield is a staggering 50% of your maximum health, a very powerful W that possibly would have taken the first place spot if Riposte just wasn't so broken. For many champions, E is the second ability you max after Q, and it usually takes the form of a dash, crowd control, secondary damage, or a buff, in some cases all of the above. One such ability that does this job excellently is Camille's Hookshot, unequivocally the best E out of any top laner in the game by a very wide margin. It's a 2-part dash that can travel a total of 1600 units if traveling to an enemy champion. For reference, the total range of your screen at max field of vision I believe is 2100 units from one diagonal end to the other. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Either way, Hookshot is notorious for being one of the best dashes in the game. It's a veritable escape worth its weight in gold, but where it truly shines is the sheer combat value you get from using it offensively. Long range grants a huge bonus attack speed buff for 5 seconds, it stuns the target for 3/4 of a second, and is amazing for repositioning during a duel or team fight. No other dash has this much packed into it. Even better is that you can cast other abilities during both dashes. So if we were talking about making the hypothetical champion, you could cast Fiora's Riposte while running straight into crowd control such as a Veigar's Cage or a Caitlyn Trap for extra surprise. Similar to Broken Wings, I don't think any other E comes this close in versatility and effectiveness. Honorable mentions go to Jax's Counter-Strike and Quinn's Vault. Counter-Strike does beat out Hookshot in terms of pure combat value. It effectively shuts down any auto attackers for 2 seconds while also stunning, but it's pretty easy to play around and doesn't offer the same all-purpose utility. It is still one of the most annoying abilities in top lane for sure. I would say Vault is the single best repositioning tool in the game. It can be used both offensively to catch up to a target, defensively to knock a target away from you, and it sets you at a perfect position to attack or defend given that the enemy target is slowed just enough for you to either put some distance between you and them or get closer to them. Its only weakness is that since it's a targeted ability, you have to be close enough to cast it on a target to begin with, which makes it not nearly as consistent. Ultimates are the pièce de résistance of a champion's kit aside from a few exceptions like Jace, Udyr, and Elise. These abilities are the most impactful in the game, which is usually offset by a long cooldown, some of them being so threatening that entire teamfights can be changed with that one ability alone. It was pretty hard to choose the best ultimate because of how many good ones there are, but I decided to choose Tryndamere's Undying Rage. There is a reason people hate Tryndamere. Most of his abilities are perfectly fine. His passive Q, W, and E are not that scary individually speaking, but what makes him so ridiculous to deal with is that he gets 5 seconds to do basically whatever the hell he wants because you can't kill him. This choice might be contested by a lot of people watching since it's a very selfish ultimate relative to some other ones in the game that have crazy teamfight value, but given the top lane is full of fighters, bruisers, and skirmishers, you really can't ask for a better ultimate than Tryndamere's. Honorable mentions go to Malphite's Unstoppable Force, Cho'Gath's Feast, and Shen's Stand United. Unstoppable Force is a given. It's the strongest out of all the big wombo combo ultimates. It's a long dash with a massive knockup and deals pretty solid damage even without ability power. Not to mention it's got a low cooldown for an ultimate this impactful. However, it's not necessarily the most all-purpose since it's really only best in a teamfight or skirmish. Many other ultimates would be more preferable in 1v1s or the laning phase and whatnot. Feast is the most consistent out of all single target executes in top lane, the others being Garen, Darius, and Urgot. It may not do nearly as much damage as the likes of Demacian Justice or a fully stacked Noxian Guillotine, but it comes with the benefit of essentially being a second smite that you can use to secure objectives. It has a low cooldown and it grants you ridiculous amounts of bonus HP, which makes for a worthwhile trade-off. Unfortunately, it is still just an execute, which doesn't win any points in terms of reliability outside just doing damage. Stand United is one of the most unique ultimates in the game, allowing you to join your teammates for a teamfight or skirmish anywhere in the map and bolstering them with a pretty strong shield. Obviously, you won't get any value out of this in terms of 1v1ing someone, but carrying the pressure of turning 1v1s or 2v2s into a 2v1 or 3v2 can single-handedly discourage the enemy team from attacking, especially if the champion joining the fight has Riven's Q, Fiora's W, and Camille's E. But it has an extremely long cooldown and, again, only has a specific usage for it, and it's not as reliable as being unkillable. Okay, so now that we're through the whole list, our new champion would have Shen's Key Barrier, Riven's Broken Wings, Fiora's Riposte, Camille's Hookshot, and Tryndamere's Undying Rage. Yeah, I'd say this makes her a very dangerous champion in the top lane. What do you guys think? Once again, let me know your own list of abilities in the comments section below. Perhaps you might have one that's even better than mine. I love theory crafting because it's so much fun just playing around with things that could be. So I look forward to seeing what everyone else can come up with. That's gonna be it for today though. If you'd like to support my work, best way you can do so is like the video, comment down below, share this video with your friends, watch my older videos, and subscribe to the channel to catch future uploads. Don't forget to check out my Twitch, Discord server, and Twitter, and consider donating to my Patreon. I would appreciate it very much. But for now, thank you all so much for watching, and I hope to see you again soon for the next video, where we're gonna talk about the best abilities for jungle. Alright, take care.